Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video. And I am so excited, happy, honored to be joined once again by my good friend Ben Jacobs, reporter for CBS Sports. You've probably seen him all over Twitter because he's basically the go-to guy for Chelsea transfer news. And in this episode, we're going to be talking all about the Mudryk special, which I still can't believe that we've signed him. But first off, Ben, how's it going? How are you doing? Thanks so much for joining me.
Good to see you. Always a pleasure to come on.
Nice. So I know you're extremely busy. I don't want to take too much of your time. So just walk me through what happened, because I was out to dinner casually. I get a text like, have you seen what Chelsea have been posting? And I was just shocked. I thought for sure that Mudryk was going to Arsenal. And then lo and behold, it seems that Chelsea admin is playing with us and he's going to Chelsea. So could you kind of walk us through exactly what happened?
Well, I think even Mudryk thought that he was going to Arsenal at the beginning of the window and even the back end of last summer, but things change. And in the end, Mudryk was presented with an opportunity of moving now into the Premier League or not at all. And Arsenal were out of the equation. So there's a few things to say here. First of all, from Chelsea's perspective, they held a meeting with a Shakhtar delegation at Stamford Bridge. And at that point, they indicated they did not want to pay a package of 100 million euros. And a week later, everything changed. So it is a U-turn to some extent from the recruitment side of the club, but this is how a window works. And after the defeat to Fulham, and to a much lesser extent, I suppose, the suspension of João Felix as well, Chelsea decided to enter the race. And this is partly down to Mudryk's high ceiling and comparatively low wages, and also the fact that he offers versatility. So many will see him as a left winger who has played in a reasonably common formation that hasn't changed too much. So his role has been to start out on the left-hand side and then when applicable, cut inside onto his favoured right foot, do a lot of dribbling, score goals, assists and so on. But I think that Chelsea, having scouted him for longer than just the last few weeks and seen him in the Champions League, realised that he's lightning quick and could be used in a more central area. So I would describe him as winger or forward. And I also think that there's even defensive parts of his game around pressing from the front that can be significantly developed. So when you look at the value now, it seems like a high number, but the potential will allow him to live up to that value. And that's partially why Chelsea moved. So Mudryk had held a direct conversation with Graham Potter, and that's very normal. And even when he didn't move over last summer, he spoke, for example, to Thomas Frank at Brentford and also to Mikel Arteta. But the conversation with Graham Potter was important because that helped persuade Mudryk that it wasn't worth waiting potentially for an uncertain summer and Arsenal to come back. And it wouldn't have been definitive because Shakhtar's valuation may not have changed. And talking to Graham Potter helped Mudryk understand that he would also be getting game time, and instantly so, at Chelsea as well. So it became very much not about a second choice in Chelsea. Arsenal fans may paint it that way, more so much that his dream was Arsenal and Chelsea were not really at the table even 2 weeks ago. And then they U-turned and decided that they were going to go and meet with the Shakhtar president to get a deal done. And then Mudryk had a choice ultimately between Chelsea or staying at Shakhtar. And the reason for that is because Arsenal were not in a race with Chelsea. They were never going to get sucked into a bidding war. Arsenal's approach was more about sticking to their valuation, not just in this deal, but continually, as they've always done, setting a precedent of not going too high because it can weaken you in the market going forward. So what we've seen here is two clubs, very different approaches, because Chelsea needs something for the now. Chelsea are prepared to pay above market value because they want to invest in youth and they believe that it isn't above market value in 3, 4, 5 years' time. The overpaying now will ultimately be beneficial because you can overpay in the short term to get a young player and then they can become so good that it becomes a very valuable deal and they're worth a lot more than what you paid for them. So you're taking a gamble and investing on youth, and that's Chelsea's strategy, coupled with wanting a marquee name and talent for the now. And then Arsenal, a bit more established in their project, a bit further along from where they were perhaps 12 months ago, are looking for momentum and depth and continuity and to stick to their valuation. So even if Chelsea hadn't entered the race, Shakhtar wouldn't have accepted Arsenal's third offer and a deal wouldn't have been done. And Arsenal would have walked away regardless. And as soon as Mudryk realised that his top choice, and we have to say that, wasn't going to meet the 100 million valuation, and as soon as Shakhtar had Chelsea there as leverage, it was always only going to go one way, Chelsea or nothing. And at that point, I think Mudryk realised that Chelsea is an equally exciting project. Okay, they're not top of the Premier League. They might not make Champions League football, but Chelsea surpassed Arsenal in the value, in the structure, in terms of its preference to Shakhtar. Also side things like this scheduled friendly when it's safe to do so in Donetsk against Shakhtar. That helps. And then on top of that, the personal terms offered to Mudryk were very beneficial as well. So add it all up, and Mudryk didn't have to hesitate because it wasn't a choice between Arsenal or Chelsea. It was basically Chelsea or nothing. And he realised that Chelsea is also an equally ambitious long-term project, a bit longer term than Arsenal, but maybe in the short term, a little bit more game time. And that can be beneficial to the player as well. And you have to weigh these things up, you know, higher wages and perhaps not Champions League football next season and regular game time now. And maybe that isn't the case with Arsenal at such an important point in their season. And even with Gabriel Jesus injured, how many games would he play at Arsenal? We don't know. Some. How many games will he play at Chelsea? We wait and see. But it wouldn't surprise me in a purely hypothetical if he ends up playing more games and starting more matches for Chelsea in the second half of this season than he would have necessarily done at Arsenal. That's just pure speculation. It's a hypothetical. We'll never know. But I think that's been a factor. So Chelsea were fast, and Berdag Eghbali and Paul Winstanley were the two main figures at the club leading on this. And they learned very quickly that they had to fly out to Turkey and do a face-to-face meeting with the Shakhtar president. And again, part of that is about the respect and the atypical nature of negotiating with Shakhtar. So they did that. And then having arrived, the deal was always going to get done quite quickly because it was clear that Arsenal were not going to match a Chelsea offer. And Chelsea didn't have to over-negotiate because Arsenal had done all the legwork for them, to be perfectly honest with you. So there was a consensus on the Arsenal side and the Shakhtar side on the guaranteed part of the fee, which in Arsenal's case was close to 70 million and in Chelsea's case was 70 million. So there was a ballpark there. And then it just became about negotiating the type of add-ons to get the deal to 30 million, and therefore with the fee on top of that of 70 million, 100 million package. And Chelsea could be quick, but the sort of framework was discussed at Stamford Bridge and also was effectively negotiated via Arsenal to the point where Shakhtar said what they wanted and Chelsea were prepared to meet it. And they didn't just cave. I think I should add that with the add-ons and the payment structure, they made sure that it was on their terms. And obviously the contract length with the player helps keep everything on the books within financial fair play guidelines. So that is also very important to Chelsea, which is why with the option included, it's an 8.5-year contract. So again, it's easy in the press to paint this as, well, Chelsea just rocked up late. They annoyed Arsenal. They put down 100 million. What are they doing? It's crazy money. What a deal for Shakhtar. But there are elements of the deal that are very much within Chelsea's favour as well. And they've got a phenomenal young talent with a high ceiling.
And I'm glad that you brought that up because that was going to be my next question, that at least what I've seen, it's 70 million euro fee, and then 30 million in add-ons. And for such a young player, you don't typically see these long-term deals of 7.5 plus a year to extend. So do you think that this deal makes sense for Chelsea to sign? It seems a little risky to perhaps sign a young player and bet on them for the future, but perhaps it could be bigger risk, bigger reward as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the first thing to say is we don't know if the full fee is going to be paid. So Mudryk will be billed as a 100 million euros player, but 30 million of the fee is not guaranteed. And some of that is contingent upon Chelsea winning the Premier League and the Champions League. Now, if this was the Abramovich era and the new ownership group have got the same ambitions, Chelsea wouldn't have gone 8 years without either winning the Premier League or the Champions League. So you could argue by Chelsea's level of ambition and history under Abramovich, they will do one or both, and therefore the full fee will be paid. But you just never know. And that's the beauty with an add-on, that if the player helps you win a Champions League or a Premier League, you're happy to pay those add-ons because you've brought in a lot more money and you have success as a football club. But the division of the fee is 70 million euros up front, 30 million in add-ons. And then that 70 million has a healthy lump sum, but Chelsea are still paying it in installments, which from a business perspective is beneficial and preferable to the club. And the payment terms from Chelsea's perspective are comfortable with where they want to be because they don't have cash flow issues necessarily. You will often, as a football club, use a kind of revolving credit in order to fund the initial payment. And then if you get the rest of the transfer fee in divisions, you're able, if you're a club like Chelsea with decent sponsorship, excellent academy revenue, and in addition, potentially fees coming in where you are the ones that get the lump sum payment from any outgoings, to be able to balance your books. And that's from a business point of view. And then from a financial fair play perspective, you account it on the books offset against the contract length. So it's actually a small annual or cycle outlay, but it lingers. So that's the only downside. A lot of people ask me the same question: why doesn't every club just hand a player an 8, 10, 12-year contract to get around financial fair play? And the short answer is that, one, if a club is well within a financial fair play cycle and therefore can declare losses and still be within financial fair play, you actually want to declare more losses over a shorter space of time, because then that cycle ends and you effectively clear the next cycle. And in doing so, if you do have a big spend, then you have more leeway. Whereas if you always just divide the fee and divide the fee and divide the fee, it can be a bit redundant because you don't win any prizes for being ridiculously in a cycle within financial fair play. So as a consequence, it can actually be better to offset costs if you're heading in that direction into that cycle, close that cycle, and then start with a blank slate. Whereas if you keep dividing it over 8 years, 10 years, and so on, then you're lingering the declaration against the contract, and eventually it might catch up on you. In other words, if Chelsea sign 10 players all at 100 million, then each of those players is a small division annually, but they're there over the next, let's say, 3 financial fair play cycles, and eventually that might add up. So that's a factor. And the second thing is, believe it or not, players don't love to sign these long contracts in many cases because they don't know where they're going to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And it can be harder for the player to agree an extension as well. I mean, look at Mudryk now, who is probably being overpaid for where he is at his age in his career. But if he lives up to his potential, it's logical to think in a season or two, he becomes box office. And let's not forget, his former Shakhtar manager, De Zerbi, who's now at Brighton, said he's a Ballon d'Or winner going forwards. So then in 2 years' time, Mudryk may say, I'm the best player at Chelsea. I want a contract extension. I want another 50k on my wage. And Chelsea may turn around and say, well, sorry, you're only 2 years into your 8.5 year or 7.5 year plus option contract. We want to wait a year or two. And that's where the player can be hampered because the club's got a lot more control. So this is a factor in all of this too. They can actually keep Mudryk on excellent wages, but if he becomes Reece James elite and of that level, let's say, and says, now I believe I should be even higher, Chelsea can say, hang on a minute. The whole point of signing you, giving you a long-term contract, paying 100 million euros for you, and giving you much higher than Arsenal and much higher than you were on at Shakhtar is we want you to stay on this package for another 2 or 3 years before we'll consider an extension. And that's where the club have a bit of control. So it's risk-reward in the sense that he has to handle the pressure of the fee and Chelsea have to handle the outlay being above market value. But in 2-3 years' time, it's actually Chelsea, if it all pans out, that will have the last laugh, both on a football perspective and also from a financial position.
That's super interesting because I had no idea about that. And so it's just really great to learn from you about that insight and to learn the ins and outs of what goes into this contract, because I think it's easy, like you said, to see, oh, they're paying 100 million. What are they doing? It's 8.5 years, but it's really well thought out. At least it seems so. So I guess time will tell. But just to kind of wrap up this transfer special, since you've covered Chelsea extensively, how would you rate this transfer? And you can give me like, the American scale. So like an A+, an A, so on and so forth.
I mean, Mudryk is such an ambitious player. He's got tremendous work ethic. He's humble. He's the first one in. He's the last one out. He puts in a lot of gym work. And he has this belief that he can somehow create improvements that most players wouldn't even consider, whether that's on the intellectual side of the game or even little things like speed. We often talk about improving speed of thought, but speed of movement is a lot harder to get faster, especially once you're fully developed. But Mudryk believes he can get stronger, he can get quicker, and that's actually more akin, and this is his mentality and the kind of people that he speaks to a runner. Because if you look, for example, at a Usain Bolt and any 100 meters sprinter, they're not just looking, obviously, for speed generally, they're looking for acceleration over short spaces. And they focus on things like the start, getting out the blocks, how quickly, and then, of course, finishing the race. And Bolt's notorious, actually, for a slow start and then a fast finish. And Mudryk's looking at the science around other sports and athletes to determine marginal gains that a lot of footballers don't put the time in or the effort in. So he's very intelligent, he's very driven, he's very focused, and he's very humble. He doesn't think he's entitled to anything. He believes, even with an excellent raw talent, that it's all about the development. So I expect him, with Chelsea's resources, with Chelsea's increased importance on data, with Chelsea's infrastructure, with Chelsea's manager in Graham Potter, who's known for developing young talent, to improve exponentially at Chelsea. And that's what's so exciting, not just in terms of the assets that he's got, but also, as I touched upon before, the versatility and that ability to actually improve in different systems, in different game management, and to gravitate potentially from a predominantly left winger to a forward, a false nine, even a number 10, to switch sides. And we haven't seen a lot of that. He's been playing in a kind of 4-2-3-1 and on the left side, and his favoured foot is on the right. But let's see what happens at Chelsea if he gets more central opportunities, if he switches sides, if he gets asked to do a Raheem Sterling style role at times that we've seen at Chelsea, which is more potentially as a kind of fullback. I don't think he'll be developed into that position, because Chelsea would be crazy to consider it. But in certain game management, he might be asked to track back. And then how does he respond to that? And is his positional sense good? What's his tackling like? And these are all areas that are not part of his game at the moment. They're not weak, but they're not Premier League strong. And what we've seen from Mudryk is the freedom at Shakhtar to be able to put his head down and dribble and run. And you see a lot of ball movement. And he uses his speed, and he loves being on the shoulder of a defender and then either running through and cutting in, or running with the ball, starting out wide and then turning. Now he's going to have a lot more interplay. He's going to have to be a lot more intricate. He's going to have to be a lot more aware of the talent and the surroundings. And that is where the intelligence will come in. And it is that decision-making ultimately. And sometimes I think, to begin with, we'll see him over-exuberant and overrunning and running into trouble. And other times I think that we'll have the benefit of that, where he can break through a defence. So it's the right system for him, and it's the right talent and infrastructure for him. So he has the best possible opportunity to live up to his billing, which is definitely as a future Ballon d'Or winner. He's that good. The sporting director at Shakhtar, Dario Serna, said to me very openly when I first spoke to him a couple of months back that there's only two players better in Mudryk's position, Kylian Mbappe and Vinny Jr. And obviously, when you're trying to sell a player for 100 million euros, you're going to sell that narrative. But then when you speak to his teammates, when you speak to De Zerbi now at Brighton, who obviously isn't as invested anymore in the situation and is not trying to drive up the player's reputation solely for price purposes, because he's got no stake in the game anymore. He's moved to Brighton. Everyone says the same thing, that this is a player with a very, very high ceiling. So again, I come back to what I said before, that I think that if it all goes according to plan, Mudryk will be a phenomenal signing for Chelsea, perhaps even more so than João Felix if he does well and Chelsea find a way to sign Felix permanently. So this is all very exciting, but he's young, he's raw, and will need a little bit of time. And that's where he has to balance the bigger squad, the larger talent around him, the pressure with a price tag. It's not about the now necessarily for Mudryk. I think we'll see it in flashes. I fully expect him to make his debut at Anfield against Liverpool. So he is going to be thrown in at the deep end. But there has to be a bit of a patience with Chelsea fans to understand that if he plays and is a bit inconsistent, if it is a bit hit and miss, if he makes a few errors that you wouldn't expect from a Premier League player, it's because he is going to have to learn. There's that high ceiling of talent and there's that Champions League experience, but it's going to take some time. And that was part of the appeal, by the way, about Arsenal as well, that his hope was that he knew Zinchenko, he'd spoken to Zinchenko, he understood the Arsenal culture. Arsenal were not quite going to pay 100 million euros and they probably weren't going to play him as much. So the paradox here is that if you take that Arsenal approach, there's less pressure on you, but there's also probably a bit less game time. If you take the Chelsea move, there's probably a bit more game time, but there's a higher transfer value on you and there's more pressure. So fans are going to see the brilliance of Mudryk, but maybe at times he will be a bit exposed to still learning and having to settle to Premier League pace. And this is the challenge, really, that Chelsea need both the now and want the future. And Mudryk allows them the now and plans for their future. But there's a balance. And we wait and see how quickly Mudryk adapts. But I think that he's got such a high potential that even though it's not in the most urgent of areas where Chelsea needed to strengthen, the signing should be celebrated.
Amazing. Well, you've completely hyped me up, Ben. I'm very excited to see him play for Chelsea now. And thank you so much for hopping on this Mudryk special. Your insight has been phenomenal. Everybody, please give Ben a follow on Twitter. I'll make sure to @ him as well so you have all of his information. And I really hope that you enjoyed this special. And I'm going to have Ben on again to give you a transfer lowdown as well. So make sure to keep your eyes peeled out for that. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, evening, whatever time you're watching this. And until next time, I'm out. Bye.